Well, welcome everyone to the August Arcadia Book Club discussion of Killers of the Flower Moon by David Grann. So, I don't know how you all felt, but there were so many times I was just like, what? How could this happen? Is
Yeah.
this, is this not a novel? I mean, I know it reads like a novel. Unbelievable. I mean, I literally did the a couple times. So
Mhm.
I know that's very dramatic, but
No, but
my God, how could this have happened? And how
yeah.
come we didn't know about it?
Well,
So, on that
yeah.
note,
Yeah.
let's talk.
I'll just say one little thing about connect to that just very briefly. I mean, one of the saddest things about it is in the early parts of this trying to uncover what was going on, they just kept missing such obvious things, or and obviously some of them were missing them intentionally, and some of the investigators were being bought off or killed. But that was, to me, you just think, God, really just put one and one together. But that goes to, and I love David Grann, and he's just an extraordinary writer, period. But it goes to you know the sense of thinking about the Osage as less than. And, when you allow yourself to think about any group as less than, it's much easier to do badly, to do bad to them. And that's, to me, the real sad message here is, this stuff's just been going on and on. It also, one last political comment, and then I'm going to let everybody else talk. I'm going to shut up. You start reading this. I agree, Hannah. You start reading about she's early now. Hey, stop. It's okay. It's okay. I'm going to bring up something about President Trump, and you always bark even though you're deaf now, you bark just, you can feel my animosity. But it began. I started reading that great chapter. I don't know what chapter it is, but it's in towards the end of the middle section, where the first trial gets has to be muted or mooted because they bought off some of the jury and bought off some of the witnesses, and you start to think, God, just made me feel creepy about potential trials of Trump or his cronies, because there's just so much money out there, and if you get it to the right person, then who knows what's going to happen. I mean, it really scared me a little, and it was kind of, it's so that trial chapter, I think it starts on about page 230 or something, was just unreal. God, it was so good, so well written. Okay, now that, remember I said I was going to shut up, now I'm going to shut up. So next.
Yeah, I think the line that did me in was the gentleman that said, "Is this trial going to be for murder or for animal cruelty?
Yeah.
Can there be a fair trial of murder of a Native American by a white man?"
Right. Yeah. Yeah, it's the same as a black man trying to get a fair trial in Mississippi in either 1901 or 2021, or 2023.
Right.
uh, yeah, it's horrible.
I think that reading this book, I mean, and by the way, great choice of a book. It reads, like Nancy was saying, it reads like fiction, but I mean, I think he's a great writer. I tore through this thing and I learned a lot. And it's that reading about the Native Americans, which we all know the stories of the boarding schools. And I mean, we're an intelligent group. We intuitively, we know that this happened, but I think especially the way that the author was able to put into words, how these people were poisoned and murdered and their houses blown up. it, it, it just really made me, I kind of thought, well, that's what, when we learned in history about the Wild West, because at the time, Oklahoma would have been considered the West, or, I mean, partly the West.
Well,
but
in the West for sure.
How it was, I guess it was just hard to understand how it could be so rampant and sanctioned. And again, like that, that quote from the book, that these weren't people. They were, who knows what everybody thought they were. But yet he paints such a great portrait of the Osage, and I didn't know about the wealth that they had, and I didn't know this specific story about them and the wealth that they had and all the oil. And if you were reading another story about the oil barons, the Osage would have been the wonderful people because they were rich and they had mansions and they had everything. But instead they were less than human because they were Indians. And by the people who tried to help them were viewed as just as bad. And it's just so sad. I mean, it makes me, reading it go, I don't want to be part of that race of people that viewed their fellow mankind that way.
Yeah.
So I was just trying to remember. So basically, at the same time, there was the Tulsa riot, where they burned down
Right.
the Black community, the Black Wall Street.
Yes.
I think it was almost the same. Actually, maybe Tulsa happened first.
1921, I think.
1921.
Yeah.
And it's in the same area. I mean,
Yeah.
it's the same part of the state. Yeah.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, and if any of you read the David Marinus biography of Jim Thorpe, there are echoes all over the place of what was going on. Although it's interesting to me now, having read this again, that he didn't really bring this up at all, really, in the Jim Thorpe book. But he brought up a lot of other things, but it seemed like he missed an opportunity to. He talked about it indirectly via Jim Thorpe hoping to have land that had oil on it, but that was all.
Yeah, I can add a personal story from my family, not that was passed on to me by my father, who moved to Oklahoma to Sapulpa when he was probably in 3rd, 4th grade, and was there until high school.
About 1930 it would have been.
Well, yeah, well, in the late 20s. So it would have been after all these instances. No, actually, Mike, it would have been about 1923, 1924 that the family moved. And my grandfather was a Presbyterian minister, and one night the Ku Klux Klan came and took him out of the house and to a barn, and he was lectured overnight about what he should preach and what he should not preach. So that's another, there's the talk here about the community, but that's an example of how direct and how threatening the community action was on people. I mean, I can only imagine my grandmother there with 3 children watching as they drive up with torches and cars and
Wow.
And have him taken off. So that was the atmosphere. And I it's different, of course, because it was talking about the racial issues. Although I don't know, I know that there were Indians in that community as well. My dad talks about a 6th grader having a Cadillac, and there was no driver's license requirements, and the 6th grader drove the Cadillac to school every day. So and that of course gets told as a humorous story. And in retrospect, kind of a feeling of, the family had the feeling of, well, good for the Indians, they got some money if they had to be moved all over the place. But I don't know if that was actually how people felt at the time of the incident. I have a feeling they may have been feeling a little bit condescending or something.
But I also remember that this is only the Oklahoma land rush, basically opening it up and having everyone rush to get what land they could grab, was in 1889. So we're really only 30 years away from that.
Yeah.
And I think that's the adult lifehood of most of the people participating in this.
Yeah, true. And didn't they say what? Some of them that went over the line too early, the Sooners. Some of them were.
Yeah.
Some of them were shot as a way of saying to people, "Don't use it." Yeah.
Kids.
Wow. Crazy time. Other comments? Hi, Larry.
So I was listening in the car on my way home from the Bridges Library System meeting, where we were making sure all the Waukesha and Jefferson County libraries have a policy where you can't try to ban 100 books at a time. You have to sign a document saying that you read it. And then I lost when I pulled into the driveway where James was worried about trials. But what I want to say is reading this book was very reminiscent to a couple of years ago, watching that HBO show, The Watchmen, and learning about the Tulsa, Oklahoma massacre. And like Nancy was saying, it was like, how did I get to be my age without ever knowing about it or hearing about it? And I guess we shouldn't be that surprised, since white men historically have written the history. So if you were female or a minority, good luck on being recorded. And given what's going on in Florida schools, you probably couldn't teach this book. And the thing that I read it a while ago, and so I was rereading. The thing that jumped out at me, besides all the outrageous stuff, I thought it was very interesting, the origins of the FBI and the Texas Rangers, because that to me was an interesting part of history. And the other thing, this was in the beginning of the book on page 18. For years after the American Revolution, the public opposed the creation of police departments, fearing that they would become forces of repression. Well, that's another part of history I was not aware of, but it's very ironic given how conservative the FBI's reputation has been. And now because they're going after people like the former president and people in his administration, we need to defund the FBI and we can't trust them anymore. So those were the things that jumped out for me.
You know, Larry, you made that comment about how did we, you know, I'm sure all of us on this call, none of us learned about any of this. I mean, you know, it's just like, how did I get to this age? And this is the first time I'm reading this story. But I was in the store, Arcadia, last week, talking with Melanie, and we were talking about it and the history of it. And I told her, I said, you guys ought to pitch this book to the high school. And, you know, I mean, this would be a great adjunct to an American history class, because there's so much. It's not just the story of Native Americans, it's the story about FBI, it's the story about how did these bastions of power like the FBI, how did they, how they came to power. And I mean, I thought that was interesting about J. Edgar Hoover, because I didn't realize that I knew he was around for a long time, but conceptually, I never realized that he was around for a long time and was already doing his bad stuff and solidifying his power base.
He was very clever.
But he was unqualified and the wrong person for the position from day one.
Yeah.
Right.
But James is right. He politically and strategically, I mean, he blackmailed like 5 presidents in a row to keep his position.
Right. I was just checking on make sure I had the title right, but yeah, you could teach a class, probably even a semester class, with Adam Hochschild's book American Midnight, which is about this same period from the end of World War I until about 1928, and this book, and then there's a newish book on the race riot, on the the Tulsa riots, and it would be a fabulous course because and someone, no matter where you are in the country, would object to it, no question, because they'd say, you're teaching people that we white people weren't generous and kind and loving to all of our neighbors. But those 3 books together would be a remarkable social science class, and particularly for like an advanced high school class. I think it's too much.
So how far, I'm sorry to interrupt, how far is where this book took place in Tulsa? Does anyone know the geography of Oklahoma?
Yeah, I have to admit I'm from Oklahoma.
He won't
So
hold
Okay, that's
it
all right.
it must mean that I really trust you all. It's the same part of the state. Tulsa and Bartlesville, that's all the northeastern corner of the United States, of Oklahoma, So it's and
Well,
so Sapulpa, like you mentioned, that's just north of Tulsa. Yeah, Muskogee's a little bit further south, but it's that corner right there. Fort Smith, Arkansas. I mean, it's all right across the border from each other. Yeah. Yeah.
well, you don't need to feel bad. Most of us are from Wisconsin, which created the John Birch Society, the Posse Comitatus, and Joe McCarthy. Although we also had Gaylord Nelson, Tammy Baldwin, and I don't know if everyone heard Ada Deer passed away today.
Oh,
Who
Did
passed
you
away,
really?
Larry?
Ada Deer,
Ada Deer.
really?
Oh, wow.
Who was-
she had a number of posts federally and statewide,
Indian Health Service. Yeah.
and she was the godmother of Ben Wickler, the chair of the state Democratic Party, and she came and spoke in June at the state Democratic Convention. She had a really nice tribute, but look her up. She's a really amazing person. But if you're not from Wisconsin, Mary Pat, so that's why you've never heard of her.
Well,
No,
and
I'm from that wonderful state called California.
Oh, okay.
I'm from Illinois, where every politician for the last 80 years has done jail time. So we have nothing to bring.
Okay. So I do. I feel better. But
You're okay.
Pawhuska and Ponca City, that's just a little bit further west of Tulsa, and Bartlesville is where the Phillips family and corporation started, and he was part of that picture, I think, that's in the book. And as well as the Marlin Mansion in Ponca City. You can still go through it any way you could, several years ago. But Mrs. Marlin ended up homeless, and so their story did not end well. But it's funny how they blamed their misfortune on those New Yorkers back east. So
I love it.
History.
All need someone to blame.
always someone to blame. But one last thing is that I just couldn't believe that this is just one string of murders. There were the end of the book. I mean, it's just like page after page after page of more families, and didn't know where they ended up, and
Yeah.
all of that. That's what I found amazing. This is just almost like one incident.
Yeah.
I agree.
And that's, I'm sorry, just one thought, and then I'll shut up again. That's one of the things I love about Grann is that he goes right to the spot and just absorbs as much of, he went to the ends of the earth to write The Wager. You just think he went really to the most desolate places, in the Patagonian Peninsula to experience what these guys lived through. And, all of his, the work he did, and those poor family members saying, well, you should look into this murder, and you should look into this murder, and you should look into this murder. And God, just, it just breaks your heart. Thoughts?
I guess I'd be interested to hear what Adele, the Oklahoman, has to say, because I thought that he captured the sense of the place quite well. And I picked out at the end, it occurred to me at the end of the book when he had the last paragraph, Webb walked me outside onto the front porch. It was dusk and the fringes of the sky had darkened. The town and the street were empty, and beyond them, the prairie too. For a moment, she fell silent, and we could hear the leaves of the blackjacks rustling in the wind. And then I looked for some other places at the very beginning. Ernest stood there, very similar. Ernest stood there alone in the heat a few days earlier. A cool rain shower had dusted, this is page 14, the earth, but afterward the sun's rays beat down mercilessly, anyway, through the blackjaw trees. This time of year, heat blurred the prairies and made the tall grass creak underfoot. In the distance, though, through the shimmering light, one could see the skeletal frames of derricks. And I think I also remember having the sense as he would describe the houses, the homes that Molly and her sister lived in. You had that sense of place. So I thought when James said that the author went to the ends of the earth to absorb the information, and I think it picked up in his ability to describe the place.
I agree.
Yeah, most definitely, particularly when he went back for the powwow and, sat there, and his manner, he was on good behavior, and tribal leaders will come up to you if, so yeah, and it did. I grew up in the northwestern part of the state that was just mostly all cattle and wheat. And it was close to the panhandle. Yeah, and my family did do the rush, and land
Sure.
rush.
Really?
Yeah.
They did? Oh my gosh.
Yeah. Wow. So we had a little spot, there in what's called Alfalfa County now. So, no, my family doesn't farm anymore. I'm the one that had to sell it, but yeah, he did capture the vastness of it, and the sunsets, and the just kind of the whole emotion of it as well. And that part of the state, you probably remember if you visited Sapulpa, it's a lot more, it's more green. That's Bartlesville has Grand Lake, and it's a beautiful lake. It's that part of the state is more like Arkansas actually than the rest of the state. So yeah,
that's cool.
Yeah, kind of tender.
Sorry.
No.
In a weird way, this book helped to bring to life for me. Again, this is my family history. My mom has a letter in one of her scrapbooks that was her father's. So my grandfather, who worked for the Chicago Northwestern Railroad. And he started at age 13. He quit school because he had to go to work to make money for the family. and then worked his way up as a vice president of the railroad. And this, as a kid, this letter always fascinated me because it was from the Blackfeet Indian tribe to my grandfather, thanking him for, I mean, now I need to go back and read it next time at my mom's, but apparently he must have been doing some business as a railroad man with the nation. And they wrote him this letter thanking him and working with you, blah, blah, blah. And they gave him an honorary Indian name. And so that's typed out in the letter. And then they also included a phonetic spelling of it so that he would know how to pronounce his Indian name. And I mean, that to me was just, oh my gosh, my grandfather had an Indian name. And as a youngster, I didn't have any idea what that meant. And, but now when I think about this, and that was in the early 30s, I mean, this just kind of helped make it come to life that, all right, here was this Indian nation that he was, but for all I know, the railroad was taking over their land, but I'm sure they didn't write him a letter thanking him for that. So I could kind of actually imagine what it was, and oh, okay, he wasn't just this this mythical Indian group of Indians. It was a nation of Blackfeet Indians, and he was working with them, and they responded in kind.
Well, that just proves that not everyone was trying to take advantage of them. At least we hope.
No, not everyone was, but I just couldn't believe how many people were complicit in this. It just, at first, because again, I'm like many of the rest of us, I knew nothing about this particular incident. And so I felt like, I kept thinking in the beginning, oh, well, maybe, so there's some crazy person who's, some madman is like attacking these people, and to what end, I'm not sure, and whatever. And then, so it was just so hard to kind of come to terms with the fact that no, like many levels of complicity here, many people guilty, many people involved in this, and that it was so planned. Like the idea that we're going to kill off these people and concentrate some portion of the wealth with Molly, and then she's married to Ernest, so that's going to work out. I mean, it's not even like it's not a crazy person with some scheme. This is a well-planned, thought out program to accomplish these goals of greed. And it's just so it's like I don't want to believe that it's true. It's just so bad. You just wish it was.
Well, it was
thought about.
Oh, I'm sorry. Go ahead.
On this thing was that when you were looking at it, as he got down to the further research, finding out how prevalent it was, so that the people that we were reading about in the book were the ones that figured out how to multiply the effect. Right. So there were many others that simply, we'll just marry into this family, kill them off, and then I'll have that head right, and so I'm fine. But the more greedy said, which is always the thing that you have to worry about. Well, if we start, let's look at this, and how do we then map it through so that we can multiply that by several times over? And that's what just amazes me. And so that there's greed and lust or greed in any organization. I will admit that I spent 2 years in the city of Chicago as basically almost as working in City Hall, but as basically equivalent of the receiver, where I was just, it's a long story, but I saw everything firsthand during the Jane Byrne administration. And what I saw was that there were a lot of greedy people that you wouldn't trust. And many times I'd come home and count my fingers just to make sure that I hadn't been taken. But I knew then the people that got caught were the ones that really got greedy.
Right.
And
what was truly sickening about it was that you know, that they thought of everything they needed, every person that they needed within the crime to help them. So get the right doctor to do the right thing, get the right burial people to get rid of the corpse as fast as you can, you know, get it into the ground so you can't do an autopsy. I mean, everybody was in on the scheme, but everybody who was in on the scheme were the people who were necessary to make the scheme airtight.
Right.
Oh, James, I might disagree with that. I'm sure, yes, those were the people that necessarily participated, but I find it hard to believe that I know that many people in the community that weren't involved just wouldn't be capable of believing that many people were involved. I mean, that like all of us, as we were reading the book, we were horrified. Oh no, I can't believe it's true. I don't want to believe it's true. And so I'm sure that there were community members that were like that. But on the other hand, I also think that there must have been a lot of people in the community, even if not involved in some way and participating in some way, sure had an inkling that things were going on.
But it was best to keep your mouth shut.
Yeah.
And that was the attitude, that even if you knew, you would keep your mouth shut.
Right. Because
that was what bothered me about the toward the end, though, is you had this broad conspiracy. They caught a few guys. Hale only got what, 6 or 7 years, and they were surprised. They convicted him because he'd murdered an Indian. Well, that they were surprised they got anything out of it. But then the FBI stopped. And what happened to all the money? And what happened to all the other murders? And why did they stop? And why did the press stop looking into it? I mean, that's sort of, it must have gone, there must have been a lot of people in on it. A lot of people that were in positions of power to squash anything that came up at all. So it would, for me, it's really showed why you need the FBI. You got to have something even over the state police to protect basic rights, or you know, you get this internal power that's just so hard to overcome.
Yeah,
I think that Tom White is the perfect, you know, agent. I was never, I mean, the first time I read it, I was just like, oh, I can't believe this guy is, you know, honest, and he's not bigoted against, you know, indigenous people, and that he's a good guy and he's family, and that he was smart as well. So I was happy that at least Tom White was appointed, by whatever reason why Herbert Hoover decided on him. So, but it was that was the best thing, the best luck.
well, two things about Hoover. He needed somebody who knew the territory and was honest, and but it wasn't because he needed him, because he needed a win.
Yes, yeah, you're exactly right.
And I think, Alan,
You're exactly right.
To your point, Alan, when you can do this nice tight thing, right? We got these guys, we put them in jail, 24 people died, it's terrible, game over. FBI is the champ. You know, it was a way he could sell that like mad. And the more, you know, if this thing just kept going on and people started saying, well, why didn't you find these other 9 people? You know, that Hoover didn't want any of that. You know, he just wanted things he could use to solidify both his position and the FBI's position, and both in the eyes of the public and in the eyes of the people who were funding, you know, the FBI, or funding what became the FBI. So I think it's sad but predictable what happened.
And I think it's like today's news cycle. There's always something new coming along. They talked a little bit about, you know, the Lindbergh baby went missing, and, you know, a missing white baby trumps, you know, 25 deceased Native Americans. You know, it's just, I guess we don't change. You know, our attention span is short, and they just go on to the next thing. And
Well, and everybody knows our attention span now is about 1/5000th of what it was when we were all growing up, or at least when I was growing up. You know, I'm older than God, so it's even kind of sad. But it's, yeah, it's terrifying.
Well, amazingly enough, I had breakfast this morning. We got talking about high school, and one of the people had gone to high school in Oklahoma. And he made a point of saying to graduate, he had to take a course in the history of Oklahoma.
Mm.
Do you know if that's true, Adele? Or
Well, yes, I had to take a course in Oklahoma history.
well, what did
Now,
they
I graduated from high school in 1970. Okay, so a lot of things
Well,
could have changed.
Yeah, but what were they teaching? I mean, you know,
Well, Will Rogers was a good guy and a folk
who
hero.
came from here and all that stuff.
Yeah, and the part about Frank Phillips and the oil around Bartlesville, that was all kind of spun very positively. There was some you know some talk a little bit about where the different 5 tribes were located within Oklahoma. There was that, and there was just a whole lot of the cowboy rancher kind of stuff. The oil wells in the front of the state capitol. So it was mostly the ranching and the oil, and the location of the tribes in the state.
Okay, I was just curious. I'm sure they didn't teach Tulsa, but
No.
Well, and I think Alan, that's funny. I thought your comment was funny because, I think I grew up in California, and we had the California history that we had to learn, and especially because because I was in Catholic school, the history of the missions, Father Sarah and the missions, was hugely stressed because, right, that was the core to, Father Sarah was this amazing man who came over from Spain, and, he built these missions, and it gave people jobs and places to live. I mean, I grew up, that was what I believed, and that's what we learned about the missions. And, we learned a little bit about, yes, there was disease, but, we didn't learn what we now know always was the truth. That, the Indians were forced to convert, and they were cheap labor and all of these things, but never, Adele, I graduated in 1974 from high school. So, it's the same, it's the same era. It was just, he was and even to me, Father Sarah was this amazing person. He walked from mission to mission. And then when I got older and started reading as the world changed about telling the history, you kind of learn what the mission system was all about. And I've often said that I would be really curious to sit in on a class now to hear what California history sounds like. Now what are they teaching about the missions and Father Sarah, and where is the emphasis?
Adele, I don't want to put you on the spot and make you remember a test you took 53 years ago, but of the 5 tribes, how many were moved there, and how many were there before the white people invaded?
Well, that's a good question. Most of the I don't know. It was probably the Plains Indian, and they were very, nomadic, and, followed the buffalo herds, that sort of thing. But it was the Cherokees and the Creeks and the Seminoles, the Osage, and the Osage. There's one more, but they were mostly from what now? I'm in trouble. They were mostly from the Southeast. That's where they were from.
Wow.
So to counter all this bad news, as a John Marshall High School in Milwaukee graduate of 1972, I took a sociology course where I remember one of the books was The New Indians, and it was about the AIM movement and stuff. And I just looked up because what I remember in my high school and the group of friends I had, the big thing was passing around books that you didn't get to read in school. And the two things I remember are Kurt Vonnegut, which you couldn't read in school, but we were all reading Kurt Vonnegut. But the other one was Bury My Heart at Wounded Knee, which I was surprised came out in 1970. And that book, I think, really jump-started at least some people knowing about Native American history. And then when I was teaching 8th grade language arts, we were paired with social studies. So we had to find historical fiction. I don't know if this book is still in print, but I taught a book called Only Earth and Sky Last Forever by Nathaniel Benchley. His son, you might know his son, Peter Benchley, who wrote Jaws, but Only Earth and Sky Last Forever was about a teenage Indian boy in the time of Custer and Crazy Horse, and Crazy Horse was his mentor, and the conclusion of the book happens at the Battle of the Little Bighorn, but it's also about him falling in love and being a teenager. And so we did that novel for years, and the kids really liked it. So some of us got that in there. And I was going to say, I don't know if we're watching two excellent Native American shows right now. Dark Winds on AMC, which is based on those Tony Hillerman novels, and Reservation Dogs on Hulu, which is a total Native American writers, actors, directors. So I think we've made some progress.
Yeah. Oh, I think so. I think so. I started teaching high school dropouts in 1972. And yeah, we used that book. We used Buried My Heart at Wounded Knee and all sorts of things. But it was a time when, people were really interested in Indian culture and in kind of calm and focus on the land that the Indians had. And so, yeah, we did a lot of big projects. I remember in the school. The school was a little unusual probably in that way, but yeah, it felt very positive. I don't know that it just continued, but we'll see. Let's hope.
Yeah, I graduated in 72 also, and I remember that book, Larry and James. And I don't think reading it in school, but reading it on my own. And yeah, I guess it gives, when I look back, gives me a background. Recently read the book Heartbeat of Wounded Knee, which is written well now like in the, well, I forget its copyright, but probably like 2020 or something, very recent. And it starts from 1890 and goes forward, and kind of like the concept of, hey, us Native American peoples are still here. And here's what we're doing. I mean, here's our struggles. Here's what we're doing. And that is an excellent book because it lays out all the different, acts at the federal level that were put, all right, we'll have Native peoples own their own land. Well, or maybe I'm not getting it all in the correct order, but they're on reservations. Well, that didn't work. They should own their own land. Then, and at some point in there, they were sent to schools. They should become, white or, non-Indian in their thinking and dress and everything. And So this book is really excellent because it lays that all out kind of in chronological order, and then comes up to the present of, like I say, that kind of like, hey, we're still here. Here's what we're doing, you know, for our tribes, for our nations, you know, for our reservations. So I highly recommend that. It's Heartbeat of Wounded Knee.
Yeah, it's right by David Truer, and
Yes.
it's available at Arcadia Books in Spring
Yes.
Green, Wisconsin.
Well, and I just want to say this book that we're reading, the writing of it, you know, it's like a funnel that opens up. I mean, you start with like one person, Molly, and then it just keeps building. And, you know, like Nancy says, each, you know, you go, oh my God. And the complicity of the, you know, people in the community, it just keeps building on itself. And it's just like, whoa, you know. And the one question I have, and maybe I missed this in the book, and maybe somebody in the group here would know about this, but you know, when these different people were being poisoned, and then they would say, well, they got the person away from like in a different city, they took them away and they got better. So what kind of poison were they being given that once it stopped, they got better? I guess I kind of thought, boy, if they're being poisoned, their system is probably compromised that they wouldn't have gotten better. Does anybody have any ideas about that?
Strychnine? They said something.
They talked about strychnine. Yeah.
And see, I think one of the reasons that they did it, they had to do it very slowly.
Right. Yeah.
So
But when they stopped being poisoned, it's like they recovered. So I guess I'm thinking, wouldn't part of their system have been compromised with this poison, and wouldn't they have been, well, like sick or maybe ending up dying anyway? Yeah, I'm just curious.
Yeah, I would point out that Molly, I was struck that she was one of those that did recover, but she was only 54 when she died. So I wonder if you recover from the immediate causes, but had long-term effects for the people.
Yeah, it's a long time since I've done anything in medicine or the chemistry that I had, but there is a certain amount of tolerance the body has, and so it can tolerate that up to a point. And so if you don't pass that point, then it can repair itself to some degree. But that's, you know, with the young age of dying, yeah, they should have been living into their 90s, given the health of the community.
That was one of the things that the two doctors that were so complicit in all this, nothing ever happened to them. As far as I could tell, they got away with it.
Yeah. Well, yeah, they were giving her insulin for her diabetes.
Yeah. And Barbara, I just quickly looked, so this is not in depth, but it's how strychnine works. The extent of poisoning caused by strychnine depends on the amount and the route of strychnine exposure and the person's condition of health at the time of exposure. Strychnine prevents the proper operation of the chemical that controls nerve signals to the muscles. The chemical controlling nerve signals works like the body's off switch for muscles. When this off switch does not work correctly, muscles throughout the body have severe painful spasms, even though the person's consciousness or thinking are not affected at first, except that the person is very excitable and in pain. Eventually the muscles tire and the person can't breathe. So I'm thinking, like with Jade, if they just gave it slowly, it would build up in the system and eventually. So if you took it away, if they didn't have too much, then they could recover.
Yeah. Well, thank you.
Mm-hmm.
So my question that we'll never know the answer to is, how did he get Ernest to go along with this? Was it from the beginning? Did he get Ernest to woo Molly? Was it to start way back then? I mean, just the mother of his children. But we won't know the answer to that. I mean, that just makes it much more horrific that he's just killing his sisters-in-law and brother-in-law and
Right, because they were the nephews of Hale, right? Ernest and his brother, is
Brian.
that correct?
Brian.
Yeah.
Most murders are done by relatives or family members. I think that's statistically a fact.
Yeah.
I just looked up the Scorsese film is going to be in theaters October 20th, and it's going to be 3 hours and 26 minutes in length.
Wow.
Big story.
Hope they have an intermission.
Yeah.
Leonardo
The trailers look really good. There's 3 trailers for it.
Leonardo DiCaprio is playing Ernest Burkhart, and Robert De Niro is playing William Hale. So,
See, I think they just lived in fear of Hale. Somehow he was intimidating of them, and they just, I don't know, you know, what he might have had over them, but I think maybe, you know, emotionally or physically, they lived in fear of him.
well, but also,
Well, James started with the former president. Look at the latest RICO indictment where people were in fear of him and did his bidding. The best commentator was the one who said, you know, I learned about RICO by watching The Sopranos, so I finally understand that the former president is Tony Soprano and the rest were all the capos underneath him. Makes perfect sense.
Yeah, but what made Hale so horrible is that at first he seemed like this great benefactor and protector.
well, but that's
that
what better way to do that
so
than to be that guy? Yeah, no, but you want to be, that's how you've got to win the confidence of these people in order to get them out of the way. And remember, most of those guys started out in life with nothing. I mean, the white guys. And this was their big chance. Sorry, they're practicing for the air and water show, I think on the roof of my building, but extremely loud.
And you know what? We could kind of equate it to, you know, people who live with abuse.
Right.
People who live with abuse. I don't know. I guess I'm maybe stretching a little bit, at least for those of us in Illinois and been in the news, the whole hazing issue at Northwestern. And, you know, people always say, well, you know, how could the woman stay? How could all this hazing happen? And these, you know, they didn't tell anybody. And it's kind of the same, you know, Ernest and his brother. I mean, I'm sure they lived in fear of their uncle, and he had whatever. I mean, if I want to really stretch, I mean, Hitler. I mean, how do these evil people, and I mean, Hale was evil, how do they have power over others that lets them get away with it? I mean, I don't understand, but it happens.
Well, if you get somebody to do one thing, then it's easier to get them to do the next. And I think that's, plus you have a lever where you can say, well, you know, I let somebody else know that you did this, then so just do this one more thing for me and then we'll forget about it. You know, and then just insidious people are very clever about all of that stuff, you know, the way they manipulate.
But the one thing that I was amazed at is if you take the position that all this was going on, it kind of been ingrained in the culture that you marry into an Indian family and then you make sure they die quickly and you walk away with the money. Mm-hmm. And so that if there are many people doing that, then it's kind of accepted, and you have to know that people are doing that. And I think I just think people had an idea this was all going on.
But I think,
Michael, those of us who married for love made a big mistake. We should have been looking for a Native woman who could make us independently wealthy. All we had to do was marry him and kill him.
Yeah.
I think it all goes back to what James said at the beginning of the meeting is that, when you dehumanize a whole group of people, and at one point I think there was, because I'm actually only, full disclosure, halfway through the book, because on the one hand, it reads very easily like a novel. On the other hand, I kept getting so upset and so angry, I would have to put it aside. And at one point, near the beginning, about a quarter of the way through, and this is where I had to put it down at one point, it says, even a judge who served as a guardian acknowledged that rich Indians spent their wealth no differently than white people with money did. Quote, there is a great deal of humanity about these Osages. As if, nobody thought of them as human. They were subhuman. And he was acknowledging, oh, there might be a little bit of humanity in these people. And just the idea that they were considered to be not competent to manage their own money or their own resources, or it just made me so angry. I would have to keep putting the book aside. And I don't think there's going to be any way that I'm going to be able to go see this movie. I think I'd be so enraged. And I think that, this still goes on. This still goes on. There was something on NPR today about the abysmal conditions at ICE detention centers. And again, it's the dehumanization of a group of people that are being treated like animals because they're thought of as animals and not being as human as some other people are. And it just, when does that ever stop?
In the Little House on the Prairie books, there's a line where she says, when they went to Oklahoma, she says, there were no people there, only Indians.
And it was the same things with the missionaries, when they went into these places and forced conversions, and they were treating these people, indigenous people, whether it was in, this country or South America or Australia or wherever, as being not human.
Right. And it still goes on because
it still goes on.
The Highway of Tears. Native American women are the most murdered population, most unsolved murders, because of that thing about tribal lands and federal lands and that. So okay, well, I knew we would have a lot to talk about. Hard to believe this is a true story, but okay, so we're gonna do a right turn here. Next month, September 20th is Tom Lake by the Ann Patchett. And I don't have one to hold up because we're sold out again. We keep selling out because it's so good.
We sold out
again?
Hopefully no Native Americans are killed in that book.
No Native Americans are killed in that book.
I do have a t-shirt that I bought at Indian Summer, which shows the band of Native Americans, and it says on the bottom, fighting terrorism since 1492.
Nicely played. Yeah, that's good. There are a couple of actors who do bad things, like sleep with women they shouldn't sleep with and stuff. But I know none of you would ever believe that could have happened. So it's obviously fiction.
There are a couple lady killers, but no real killers.
No, it's a really beautiful book. It's just great. And and if you know much about Chekhov, there's a lot of Chekhov kind of sprinkled through it, and of course Our Town, because that's where the young woman meets. That's where the mom in the book, as she's telling her story, but when she's young, she meets the soon-to-be movie star in a production of Our Town.
I've been told that Meryl Streep reads the book if anybody wants to.
Yeah,
Meryl
Streep is doing the audiobook, just as Tom Hanks did the audiobook for her previous novel, The Dutch House, which is also a wonderful book. And, remember, she owns a bookstore, so, okay. All right. Any questions? Any remarks for the good of the order?